we could ask you some ideas about joining the journal, or if you have some ideas for the journal or wishes for the journal or something. Very, very light conversation.
It takes off in a big way. I think we need more translation journals, and
really?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think, you know, students need access to more writing and translation and let's say more relaxed contexts and frameworks. So I think, yeah, that's true. And I think you've been incredibly efficient.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And what my idea for the journal is, of course, that we shall speak about translation, but going out of the discipline that she was speaking about, out of the discipline of translation studies, because it's exploded, I think. And one way we could do that is to interact and get new concepts, or interact translation and memory. I appreciate your book very much, and translation in and world literature. If you have some ideas of how we could do that, if you could, because in between the lines, translation is very present in your work, but you don't use it so explicitly. Could that be something we could have a discussion on? Do you think so?
Because it's so organic. I think for comparatists, it's so internalized.
Well, I think it's becoming much more explicit. I mean, my book on what is world literature, the middle section is on translation, and my new book, recent book on how to read world literature, is a chapter on translation. You could say it's made explicit at one point, and then it runs through the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, it's so striking that, you know, when I was in graduate school, when we were in graduate school, there were no courses in translation studies in comparative literature because you were not supposed to read translations.
And I remember I had a friend at Brown who wanted to do a translation of Gide for his doctoral dissertation, and that was considered, I don't know, I don't even think...
you couldn't do it.
You couldn't do it. It was just
it wasn't considered.
Inconceivable. It was not academic. It was not. It didn't qualify. It was too practical, I suppose. It was considered craftsmanship or something, as opposed to, you know, an intellectual operation of the highest order. You know, and he said, "Oh, I'll write a critical introduction." That didn't pass either. And now, you know, you have doctoral programs.
Well, ironic. I mean, say Gayatri Spivak's, you know, career was made by you know, her translation with the critical introduction to grammatology. You know, so the very field that would say you can't do translation, it was happening all around.
Yeah, and again, the extent to which we're reliant on it, it seems a little silly to keep denying it or marginalizing it. So.
And your personal story, how did you get into translation?
I have refugee parents, and I grew up in a house where people were always transacting in languages, some of which were understood, some of which weren't, but I knew it was really important. And my father, in fact, survived a camp by knowing how to translate, and he always told me, you need to know languages in the most, you know, pragmatic sense. So, and understanding how other people think is really important.
I'm interested in the kind of emphasis here on, you know, the religious translation, and because that's I think something that has not been thought about very much with, say, in comparative literature, which has constructed itself as a very secular enterprise, and the activism that's seen as a political activism often supposed to be of a secular nature, whereas here, of course, we have a very religiously based activism of intervening in culture in different ways. My own father was an Episcopalian missionary in the Philippines. Both my brothers were born there. I was born back in this country. But I think one reason I became a comparatist was hearing these stories of the Philippines. My father had learned Igorot, which was not so common among the missionaries of his day, but he was very interested in that sort of enculturation in a double sense.
I understand you very well. I started to be interested in translation too, since I'm Norwegian, a native speaker from and I live in Italy. So I was starting to ask myself, do I say the same things in Norwegian and Italian? Do I think the same things in those two languages? Do I translate myself when I...
And what language did you ask yourself those questions? In Italian? Or do you ask the question the same way in the two languages?
Yeah, of course. So that there is a kind of personal experience and thought and questioning in it from the beginning. I understand that very well.
I remember people telling me the critical question was, what language do you dream in?
Yes.
So it's the test.
But that's not a problem. That's not really the problem, because you dream in the language you need for that dream. It's not that you have one
not your default
dominating.
Would you say you dream in different languages? If there's a Norwegian setting as the dream, you'll dream in?
Yes. And I remember very well a dream that many years ago, in the beginning, in the 80s, when I stayed in Italy, and I was dreaming about an Italian politician. And I was wondering, why does he speak in Norwegian? I know that's funny in the dream.
That's funny. Because you had enculturated him, you had assimilated him.
Maybe. Do you have any reactions of what we have heard this morning?
Provocative.
Both of them?
Yeah. They were both.
Well, if Pim is talking, this institute is primarily a Protestant, I suppose, organization. The NIDA, I mean, it's really Protestant biblical studies, right?
Yes.
So I'd be interested in what's the reaction of the Protestant scholars here to his kind of take on the conservatism of the Catholic, and I mean, it's, I think, significant and interesting. But then the question is, he was just taking the sort of, well, look how conservative the Catholics are becoming. Does this resonate with Protestant biblical translation, and if so, how?
Yes.
That was sort of left out of his talk.
He didn't speak about that at all.
Yeah.
And he maybe spoke about inculturation as from the source point of view all the time, not from the receiving point of view.
Right.
But that would be a question, I think. That could be as much inculturation. I take what you give me and I make it mine.
Absolutely.
And so it's just the opposite position.
Right. Well, that's more like what Gayatri was saying about,
more like subaltern studies. So, but I'm glad you thought this, and Bharata thought it.
Yes, Bharata is interesting because he was my colleague in Urbino, precisely.
And my real friend was Ferruccio Rossilandi.
Yes. And what happens is Ferruccio Rossilandi is his book on ideology is not translated. I don't know if
it has been translated.
Then in English.
It has been translated by one of my students.
But he didn't have any popular success here.
No.
And also in Italy, in the EU, and he was interesting because he studied in Great Britain, so inside a framework of logical linguistics, and then he opened the world from there.
He was wonderful. I still miss him.
Yes.
I was a very, very good friend. I mean,
I'm very friend of his one of his students, who is Augusto Ponzi, who teaches in Bari, where he taught actually. and I think that his work, he wrote a book on ideology, but also a book on linguistics. And I think still are important and have something of new. So I think it's to rediscover Rossilandi would be
a good thing.
Interesting.
Also
in translation.
Also in translation.
Also there, he had a lot of. He is one of these men of the Italy of the 50s, 60s.
Yes, and also Piedmontese. He was an Austro-Hungarian gentleman.
Yes, very open, with his very open view. A very strong Marxist, but at the same time with the open mind and the possibility to.
Yes, he was in Cuba, remember?
Yeah.
So no, Ferruccio was an original. He was an original. He gave me all of his Italian books, but you know my Italian is. So I made a mistake. I gave them to Franco Moretti. I never should have. I should have kept them, because you know he was. I mean that's it was in his will. So I thought I should give them to people who can really read them. I mean I read Italian. I read Gramsci in Italian.
You can, if you read French, of course.
No, I read Gramsci in Italian because what I was quoting, that's the Italian. The English translation, Togliatti cut him up into little boxes, and that's what the English translation is, right? I mean, even a little book called The Modern Prince. Gramsci didn't write a book called The Modern Prince.
Yes, right.
You know, I mean.
Yes, because there was a process of, I don't know if, of transforming book what was a complex. I don't know. It's like life.
Yes, it's like the footprint of thinking.
Yes.
You know, that's what it is.
Yes.
For me, I'm just excited that I can get on the inside and do something with translation theory, which is really to continue the discussion that we've, I think, come into through CETRA, which we're now reshaping a bit around religious discourse translation in the night of school. But here we have, every 2 years I get to go because of what Eugene Nida did after Vatican II.
Right.
And
I was so surprised that it was so well accepted at that time. Okay, 1960s.
Well,
at a time of radical change. But
there was a lot going on, and the Vatican was under a lot of pressure back then to open up a bit.
Yes.
And of course, when they let Latin go, you know, but when some of the Vatican II changes happened, I think some in the Vatican power structure would love to recall a lot of that.
well, that's what I found happening from 1985. I mean, that term enculturation was explicitly reactionary.
Right.